This week on Merchants of Change, we've got Mike Paladino. Mike played football for the Trinity College Bantams before getting started in sales at VM Turbo back in 2015. He spent the past 7 years at PandaDoc, where he started as an AE and finished as VP of Sales. Here he is, Mike Paladino. I'm J.R. Butler, co-founder of the Shift Group, and you're listening to Merchants of Change. This is a podcast about transferring the skills and behaviors we acquire as athletes into being a professional technology salesperson. Each week, we'll introduce you to a top performer who will help us understand how they became professional merchants of change. What's up, kid? How we doing, Mike?
Doing great, JR. Really happy to be here. How are things with you today?
I'm good, man. Pumped to have you on the show. We got Mike Paladino. So, Mike, just for some quick context, our audience is a lot of new sellers, folks that are transitioning into sales for the first time. And our goal at Shift Group, we help elite athletes as well as military veterans transition into, high-paying sales jobs. And all of our guests are former athletes like yourself and who have found a ton of success in sales. So we always like to start with the sports career, get into the transition, and then, leave our audience with some great sales advice. So let's back up here to the beginning. And this is a broad question intentionally, but when I ask you, favorite memories of playing sports in high school and college, what are some of the first things that pop into your head?
Yeah, it's a great question. First and foremost, it's the wins, right? Taking a lot of hits to the head in the career, so I don't really remember specific stats or one game over another except for those wins, and more specifically, sharing those wins with your buddies and your teammates. And in a genuine way, it's really sharing those results with people that you really care about that I remember the most. That and the social side of things, long AAU weekends or double sessions, in the sun, anywhere where there's opportunity to build camaraderie are really the things that I remember and feel nostalgic about when I think about sports career,
Those trips when you're young are just the best, dude. The hotel room, the rug hockey, it's unreal. I heard a story about reading letters to your teammates. What's that all about?
Yeah, that's kind of niche, but it was a role that was bestowed upon me at Trinity as a senior, and it's kind of a locker room tradition where on the Friday before game day, everybody airs out their grievances from the previous week in a public way, but in an anonymous way if you want. So oftentimes it's a anonymous letter calling out somebody for messing up an assignment or maybe doing something socially the weekend before that was a no-no in the locker room, even the opportunity to kind of give it to your coaching staff in a private way a little bit too, but all with the hopes of kind of agreeing to overcome your conflicts in a humorous public way in front of the team. And so I was fortunate enough to, as a senior, be elected as the person to read those on a weekly basis. And really, really fun and really, really proud moment, even if it sounds kind of silly from a cultural locker room side of things,
That's amazing. So it's like football's version of kangaroo court. I love that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it gets pretty humorous too. People start to get really, really witty with how they phrase things and who they write notes from. And you start to figure out people's personal style and their humor as well. So anyway, it's like half stand-up, half locker room stuff,
Totally. How do you think your teammates from Trinity would describe you?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's definitely different from how I think my high school teammates would describe me. There's obviously a substantial leap from high school to college competition. But in college, I think more of a role player, more of a culture guy, really. And that was great lessons for me to learn. But ultimately, I think that my teammates would say, first off, I was a great teammate, and somebody who took it seriously when it was time to take things seriously, but also could take that serious hat off when it was time to be a friend and be, you know, to have a role off the field as well that still contributed to that relationship. So I think that culturally, huge boon to the team, and really just an honest person that is always there to support my teammates.
Well, I can say as somebody who worked with you that carried into your career as well.
Well, I thank you.
All right, so Mike, we always joke around. People are buzzing around playing sports in college and they just can't wait to be a salesperson, right? So obviously, that is not the case. There's very few little kids out there like, yeah, I want to be a sales guy someday. So I'm curious to know, like, coming out of Trinity, how'd you end up in sales? Were there other things that you tried or explored before you ended up in sales?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you say, like, no one actually thinks that way. It's because they don't know that what they're doing now would actually transpose perfectly to a sales career. And I certainly did not know that at the time. To be frank, I was just looking for employment once I graduated. And so the company that I'd been doing summer labor work at, 1-800-Pavement, I'm sure the folks in New England have seen their trucks driving around, but I was a seal coater and a jackhammer guy in the summers. And so they offered me like an operations role in the office, and it was right out of school. Like the day after I graduated, I had to report, which with hindsight was foolish, but at the time seemed right. And it was excellent from sort of a leadership component, right? I got to learn how to work with folks who had 10, 20, 30 years more experience, but I had a little bit more authority than them in one realm where I kind of had to build the schedule and make sure that the resources were all deployed effectively to execute on our jobs. It was a family business, though. So while I felt like I was kind of a part of a team and I felt like I could use some of the skills that I had previously in a very effective manner, I knew that there was kind of a ceiling because my last name was different than the owners, right? So that's actually when I started over, which just sounds crazy to start over at 25, with hindsight right now, but joined a cold calling machine and finally hit my foray into sales that way. Immediately hooked. Yeah,
absolutely. And by the way, like I think everybody should do manual labor at some point in their like youth, their teens, their 20s. Like, I grew up roofing, dude. You can appreciate having to make 100 cold calls a day when you spend 100-degree day on a hot tar roof in New England in the summer. So I can appreciate that. That's awesome. So was your first sales job hammering the phones at VM Turbo?
It absolutely was. And the only exposure I had to that was a bunch of people who had done it before saying that I'd probably be a good fit and I'd really like it. And so, yeah, one day I think I came in for a second stage interview or something like that to see the office, went down to Boylston, and opened those doors and saw, 300-400 guys and gals, what felt to me in a locker room going to work. And I was like, whoa, this is cool. And immediately one guy pointed and was like, that guy's got good hair. We should hire him. And then all of a sudden I was like, okay, this is a locker room. And I really think that I could spend my work hours in an environment like this. So that was the first sort of interest was being there physically and seeing it with my own eyes and realizing, oh, okay, this is something that I'm interested in pursuing for sure.
It was I don't want to like sound like an old guy yelling at the clouds, but dude, it was such a great culture, such a great environment for early stage salespeople. All you have to do is look at the downline of people that came out of that place and what they're doing now. Guys like you that have gone on to like just incredibly successful careers. What are some things that you remember about back then, like 2015 when we were buzzing?
Well, I remember the banners on the wall, all the Celtics banners celebrating success that the the revenue performance basically was driving quarter over quarter. So obviously there was an immediate connection to sports when it came to that, and I like that. And then really feeling confident going into my first day after sort of our onboarding, and that first call really just punching me in the face, like realizing I had no idea what I was doing. But I knew I was interested in cracking the code, so I ended up starting to do, practice cold calls with my dad, with my friends, anybody who would listen to, somebody who was so ignorant about virtualization tried to communicate something of value in a cohesive way. But ultimately, that type of work ethic is what kind of got me to very quickly, once I figured things out, having like a high volume of positive conversations that, maybe weren't qualified just quite as they ought to be, but certainly convincing people to take time at the very least. So I knew I had a little bit of skill once I felt comfortable, but it was scary, especially sitting around all those folks that seemed like they had it all figured out, even though that was probably BS with hindsight too. But, you feel that social pressure to want to perform, and that's a place where you feel comfortable when, you're people like us. So.
100%. Yeah, it was learning through osmosis a lot, and I always tell people, like, you got to get busy before you can get productive. So you got to mess up a bunch before you can really figure out your style and figure out what works. And we certainly had plenty of opportunity while we were there. When you look back, like anything from like early days of your career, now that you're looking back at it a little bit, that you potentially do over if you had the chance?
It's a good question. I think that to kind of keep it in the context of a team environment or sort of those types of skills that you learn from competing, it's specifically with that U.S. payment experience, your loyalty really doesn't mean so much in the business world, unfortunately. And that's a lesson that I wish I had known sooner. Not because it would have necessarily made me change the way I was behaving or the way I was committing to a company, but understanding that they don't quite have that same perspective when it comes to you as an individual generally. And learning that early was actually extremely valuable for the rest of my career. But early on, I think a lot of young people, especially people who are committed and accountable for their own actions, I think loyalty is a trait that comes with that. And just be careful sharing that loyalty 100% because it's probably not going to be reciprocated. It might reign true in your performance or in your professionalism, but ultimately, it ain't personal, man. It's a work environment. So shed that stuff early is probably a good lesson.
That's really good. Really, really good. It took me, honestly, till my mid-30s to learn that lesson. I learned it the hard way, right? Like you give so much and you think that, at the end of the day, those people have your back the way that you had their back or the organization's back, and that's not always the case. So really, really good lesson there. So getting into kind of the sales portion here, right? If and I'm sure you're engaged with Trinity, and so if a senior calls you, right, they're thinking about getting into sales, and we have this happen a lot. A lot of our kids will get multiple offers. So I'm really curious to get your take here. What's your general guidance on like how a first time salesperson getting into a BDR role, what should they be looking for in the company that they select to start their career at?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and one that I wish that I had considered when I was in these stages of my career as well. That said, I think first and foremost, I'd say don't overthink it. Like, you certainly have a bunch of opportunities, and that's fantastic. You're valuable in the marketplace. You're high demand, right? You want to take it seriously, but don't necessarily overthink it the way I see it. Because in my career, what I've noticed specifically in software and inside sales is that you're going to build incredible relationships with the people that you start with and the good people at the first company that you join, right? And all of that's certainly going to have an impact on you. But odds are you won't be an AE and you won't be a VP of sales at the first place that you enter, right? So first off, it's like, don't overthink it. Secondly, I think it kind of comes back to that first feeling that I had walking into the VM Turbo office, which was I saw it with my own eyes, and I could sense what a day in the life of an employee was there. And I'm a visual learner, and I need to see things, right? So I would just encourage people to try as much as they can to see what a working day looks like. And I know that might be harder and harder with virtual work environments and all of that jazz in the world we're in today. But do anything you can to see what a day in the life of a average employee is. Try to suss out how other employees who are currently there kind of feel the same way about their day to day. And use that as the major decision-making criteria. Like, are these people happy? Do they seem like they're working hard, but they actually care about what they're doing? They're connected to a larger vision. Are there leaders at this company that when they say something to you, you believe them and other people believe them and follow them? Those are the things that I'd be looking for, the intangibles, not quite the details. It's really like, is this a good team? Is this franchise moving in the right direction? Do they have leadership that I feel like care about me and will care about developing my skills and I want to serve them? Like, those are the questions I'd be asking. Not so much product market fit, or do I have a quick path to AE, or am I getting paid the same amount as maybe some other cold callers in the market? Like, those things matter when you're trying to make an ultimate decision, but they're not the things that really make the right decision. So I'd stay focused on the softer side of things than the harder.
I couldn't agree more. We have kids that make decisions based off of a 5K gap in base salary. When I know deep down, I'm like, hey, this leadership team is a much better fit for you. You're gonna gel here, and you're gonna work for people that are gonna teach you. And that first leadership organization that you work underneath is so important, right? Like, we just look at, like we talked about, all the people that came out of Turbo, because we had some leaders there that really gave a shit and like really helped kids start their career on the right foot. I remember when you left Turbo to go to Panda Doc. I remember I had coffee with your CEO down in Panera Bread, and after I met him, I'm like, Mike, this is a cool company. Like, great job, great choice. And you had an unbelievable run there, and I knew it was going to be a great opportunity. Tell us a little bit about what that run was like for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, first, it's kind of why did I even want to go on that journey? And I got to give you props, even, from afar, and a lot of other leaders there at VM Turbo, because once I got in seat, I realized that I'd kind of missed the wave a little bit. I saw you, and I saw Yotam, and I saw Cody, and I saw a bunch of AEs, and I'm kind of like, dang, like I might have just been a little late on this, like 2 years or so. And what I was looking for was a place where I could be like you guys, and make my impact on a business, be one of the first kind of sellers to actually, throw their weight around, and then, potentially take on more responsibility as I could. So I saw you guys and I was like, hey, I could connect my previous experience to this world if I'm successful as an individual contributor. So I was looking for the place to do that, and I got really, really lucky. In terms of finding a place where that came true. I didn't know for sure that was going to happen, but I was looking to try to experience that. So anyhow, I started as an individual contributor there. I was in my ramp doing outbound SDR work, and the qualification criteria was leaving a bunch of people on the table who actually wanted to have conversations with somebody at PandaDoc. And so I created my own little full cycle selling motion where I would source opportunities and kick those to the AE, but the ones that weren't qualified based on the criteria, I would give them a good experience and try to bring them to close. And it wound up that there was this incredible efficient motion where I could source and close, and somebody else is closing huge ACVs all from the same list of leads. And so from there, the operations guy was like, hey, you didn't ask for permission to do this, but it's working. So can you do it with like 4 or 5 more people? And I was like, yeah, like didn't even think about it. I was just like, yes, I can do that, and fortunate enough, it worked out. I took a bet on myself, and, ended up scaling just that puppy to like 25 or 30 people. And once that happened, the founders trusted me, and they were just giving me more and more opportunity to do what I did well.
That's amazing. It just shows like, great players can be great players in any environment, but the ones that are going to really rise and shine are going to do it in the perfect environment, and PandaDoc was that for you. What do you like looking back now? And I love like ask for forgiveness, not permission. Perfect. But what else do you attribute your success at PandaDoc to, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds corny, but I was an East Coast guy coming into a West Coast culture, which I actually liked. You know, it was going from VM Turbo, where the guys were pretty chill. It was still a pretty hardcore experience, you know, whereas people were wearing white tees in the office and, you know, flip flops and all that jazz. And I liked it. It was different, but I knew immediately that I had an edge, at least from a work ethic standpoint. So when other folks were kind of leaning into that West Coast lifestyle where the employees' sort of mental health is important, it's like, yeah, of course. I found a really good balance of using that type of culture, but also using it to my advantage from a performance standpoint. So I was outworking people immediately. The other piece was I'm a pretty humble person when it comes to learning. So I was just stealing stuff that was working for other people that I would hear. I wouldn't even hear how it was received on the other line. It was just like, oh, I like that. I'm going to package that into my cold calling or into my full cycle sales deals. So like another thing is some folks, like, they want to figure it out for themselves, and they want to be isolated in their ramp or something like that. And I get that from like a competitive and an ownership standpoint. But if you get into sales, you understand you need to diversify your opportunities, and you need to try to be as flexible as possible to try things that work for you. So I had that immediately as well, like no real ego when it came to failing or trying new things and doing that at a high rate of effort.
100%, dude. And like you made a point there. Every great like thing that I've done in sales, I stole it from somebody else and made it my own. You know, took the good, cut out the bad, and made it my own. So like, you got to be around people to really learn that, and that's awesome. What do you like looking back? What are like one or two of your favorite lessons that you've learned over the years?
Oof. That's like philosophical, JR.
Well, I'm thinking specifically of a sign that used to hang up at Turbo, because I think it was the best lesson that I ever learned.
Well, that's a lesson that I think a lot of people need to learn more and more as it seems to me victimhood is growing. The trend of victimhood is growing in the world these days, and it's not the way to get what you want, and it's not the way to try to improve at all. So yes, no victims was something that I had learned probably before Turbo, but seeing it in a professional environment really validated my own perspective on kind of how life works, never mind how work works. And to take that a step further, when I was in my sort of sales leadership career, started budding sales leadership career at VM Turbo, a book that I read that kind of ties that perfectly to the business world, and for your military folks as well, is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. I mean, it's just the best book when it comes to accountability, and specifically personal accountability in a team environment. So I highly recommend folks to read that. That changed my perspective completely on how to run a team, and how to look in the mirror when things were going wrong. So as an individual contributor, no victims obviously relates. It makes sense, right? I'm not going to be a victim as a seller. But then as a leader, you also take on a lot more responsibilities that aren't just carrying a bag per se. And you're going to be faced with a lot of other non-performance related opportunities to show how you can be personally accountable for any problems that are happening in your team. So and people respond to that so well. Like, if you're a humble leader who can admit when they're wrong, it's almost like a journalist. It's like you just want to trust that this person is saying what they think is true. And if they're wrong, they'll admit it. So it's sort of this combination of never being a victim, always looking in the mirror first and foremost, and taking accountability in situations where maybe you could have done something different to change an outcome.
It's literally one of my favorite books ever. I've read it twice. And Mike and I are referencing, there used to be a huge sign over the sales floor at Turbo that said no victims. And it stuck with me. I think I grew up with it as a hockey coach, as a dad, right? Like, you come from a blue collar you come from a blue collar background and that's what you're taught. Like, you're not entitled to anything. No one cares, work harder. Right. My biggest lesson from extreme ownership as a middle manager was like when somebody above me makes a decision and I don't agree with it, but I still roll it down to that's on me as the middle manager. I can't point a finger at the CEO and say, well, this is a mistake. If I have to own that, I have to be the person that at least stands for, hey, this is why I think this is wrong. And if they still want to go do that thing, which, we witness that a lot in our experience, then it's on you. You got to own that. So, dude, I'm glad you mentioned that book. It's so good.
You're right. And one other thing on the middle management piece, because that resonates in a major way, but not only are you going to have to own it and then deliver it, but how do you navigate those tough managing up conversations too, when it's like, hey, I don't understand this, or I can't own this. And that's a subtle skill as well. You need to always feel comfortable being honest and speaking your mind upward. And that's how you're going to build a brand that is trusted, as a leader. But that said too, putting the pressure on your leaders to explain to you why are we doing this is a very, very good way to then at least say, okay, I'm going to have to swallow a pill here and I'm going to have to lead a bunch of people into something that maybe I don't 100% agree with, but at least I know why I'm doing it. And then I can communicate downward why it fits into a larger vision. And provided that something is connected to the goal that we've been trying to, pitch or drive, results towards, at least it's connected to a larger vision. And it's not just like, this is a one-off crazy harebrained idea. It puts you in a position where you can sell it down better. And perhaps you'll have a better attitude about doing the actual work too.
Yeah, and it's also good, this is good for first-time leaders that are listening to this, is like if there's multiple scenarios where they roll out a new strategy and you make a really good argument as why it's not a good strategy and they still do it anyway and they don't change it until they learn that it didn't work, and that keeps happening, then it's good to pay attention. Like, okay, these leaders, I call it like the emperor's new clothes. They want people that are going to be around them that are going to agree with everything they say. And at a certain point, it's like, okay, is this a place that I want to be too, right? So having that extreme ownership is a really good way to evaluate the people you're surrounding yourself with. So let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about skills development. I believe this, right? This is going to be a tough year. One of our themes this year in my business is tough times don't last, tough people do. What do you think? When you look at the individual contributors out there, what skill are the best reps going to have that are going to come out of this shining over the next 12 months?
Well, I think it's a good place to kind of focus on the attitude that it takes to be a solid seller, the mindset that it requires, which is one of resilience and like immense grit, right? And any sales leader going into this year, or any recession for that point, grit and performance, that combination, those are the ones that never get touched when markets start to get impacted by external things, right? So you got to check those boxes. If there's not a ton of opportunity to perform, you're a new hire, you're trying to prove yourself, and you don't have the skill set, but you have the grit. It's like, show that grit, take on more. Be really noisy about your own development. Start to try to figure out who are the mentors in your org that are going to make it, that can maybe teach you a thing or two about what it takes to always be in the top 20%, which is really where you need to be to have 100% job security in a business that's performing. So I would say lean into legit development, the skills that you can acquire now. It's an opportunity to learn more because you're not necessarily hitting the phones, trying to hit 140 dials per se in like a calculated way. That might be a waste of your time. So perhaps it's like maybe make 70 or 80 calls and then spend that additional time being a sponge. That's actually something that I should have done more at my time at Turbo, was figure out mentorship opportunities from people there. And I think I kind of fit the rule more of trying to figure it out for myself and being isolated at VM Turbo. And that was a mistake. If I hadn't, I would have had great relationships with people who didn't necessarily work with me or work with me in a direct capacity like yourself. And imagine the network opportunities that I would have now when I need them. Had I previously thought a little bit more strategically about my career over a long period of time. So that's another thing, is like, don't get caught up in this tunnel where, oh my goodness, things are so hard. It's like, hey, your career is going to be 40, 50 years, if you're lucky, only 30, but like, you're going to be doing this for a long, long time. So don't get it twisted. Like, the next shot's going to go in, and just stay focused, keep your stick on the ice, and look for opportunities to learn when it's famine out there.
Absolutely. And also, like, having that no victim mindset is going to be important this year, because we're all playing on the same ice. Everybody's calling companies with less budget, right? Less time for you, and only want to buy nice to have. So it is what it is, right? You got to kind of deal with it, and spending that time around those people you can learn from right now is a huge opportunity. And I guess we always kind of talk about mentorship, and it sounds like one regret is you wish you kind of leaned into that a little bit more, but I'm sure you had some mentors in your career that had a meaningful impact on you. Can you highlight one of your mentors for us and what you learned from them?
Yeah, I mean, the first one was this gentleman named Taft Love, who hired me at PandaDoc. He was a sales ops guy, but he came from a background of being a cop. Like, he was a detective in South Carolina before he got into his foray in SaaS. And so that type of person who had a really, really strategic mindset, but came from a more blue collar background, had like the type of perspective that I really respect in a leader. So he was certainly one of them. But the biggest mentor I had was our CRO, Nate Gilmore, who I had the pleasure of being on the hiring committee for. And once he joined, like, not only turbocharged our business, but gave me perspective again that allowed me to kind of think more critically about the VP sales type of a role, or even a CRO role or a GM role. And he calls himself a hippie capitalist, which is kind of the perfect blend of what I think my culture has become from a salesperson. It's like East Coast born and bred, but kind of made my bones on the West Coast. So I feel kind of like a very similar balance there. And without him, I certainly would not be the leader that I am today. And I know for a fact PandaDoc would not be where it was either. So great teammate. And a great boss. And like, that's what you're kind of looking for in a mentor. He was my direct boss, but also a fantastic mentor. So shout outs to Nate as well.
That's awesome. Yeah. So your track record, PandaDoc, Rocket Ship, Turbo, Rocket Ship. You made the statement, which I loved. You were like, I got lucky, right? Because I always tell people, anybody who went to an organization that ended up being, a unicorn or having like an amazing exit, if they don't give a little bit of credit to luck, then they're full of shit, right? So I'm the same way. But now I'm a little bit older. I can look back with some knowledge, and I can kind of look at what Turbo was, and I'm like, yeah, it checked all these boxes, and that's what made it a $2 billion organization, right? Now, real quick, before we kind of close out, picking a rocket ship early in your career is a game changer. We all know that, right? We've seen most CROs, VPs of sales, at one point they picked the right company. Looking back now, what do you think what are like 3 or 4 characteristics of an early stage company that you're like, this has potential to be a rocket ship, to be a unicorn? What are you looking at?
Well, I mean, PandaDoc was really early stage, right, when I joined. So I was employee number like 35. So for that, it was, is there green pasture here? Like, that, first and foremost, like, is there opportunity for me to do something? So you got to do that from like a selfish standpoint. And then from there, it's like, do I feel like I trust the people and the message that they're giving? Like, to be frank, CEOs and founders are going to create these incredibly vivid vision statements and mission statements that are going to sound ridiculous, up front. But can you drill into some of the more personal skills of these leaders and understand what their character is like is really where I was trying to evaluate. The other thing too is just kind of back to the first sort of topic we were discussing. It's like the leaders in the company, if there are some there, evaluating them because they were in the same shoes as you. Like, why did they choose the company? So like you have some data sets, some data points that you can mine if you're talking to folks that you feel like you trust or you might want to follow. The other thing too is like just asking people why they're motivated to do what they do, that are currently employed at that company, right? If the answer is some altruistic thing, then it's like, okay, maybe I don't necessarily trust that. But if the person says, hey man, I got an opportunity to crush it and do exactly what I want to do here, and I trust that guy over there to keep that dream alive, like super high level are the things that I was evaluating. Because the people are the reason that rocket ships exist, right? Like, sure, the product market fit, is the product actually doing what it says it does? Obviously important. Every seller needs to check those boxes. But when it comes to choosing the rocket ship, it's those other things that stand out. The people, the things that they say, and doing what they say. So again, accountability, ownership of people's words, strong leadership. And really like keeping it simple is really another huge thing for early stage startups. If things seem too complex, chances are they're too complex. If it looks and smells like, I'm not going to taste it. So, just keep your eyes, your nose, and your ears open as well. Trust your instincts, but it's mostly people.
I couldn't agree more. There's a million technology companies that we've never heard of that had product market fit. They had unique differentiation. They had all those little tangible ingredients to be a unicorn, and nobody ever heard of them because they didn't execute, and people execute, not technology. So I couldn't agree more.
Right.
All right, dude. Last two questions. We always ask every guest these two. The first is, we want you to highlight a skill that makes you an elite seller. What do you think your elite selling skill is?
Well, I almost stepped on this answer when you were talking about luck because I agree with you. Like, you got to be humble and you got to say you're lucky, but you also had you had an impact on your own outcome. So it's a mix of those two things. So what I would say is actually manifesting luck, which is a skill. Like, this is a real thing. I don't mean that like a general definition. It's like the classic definition, like luck is where preparation meets opportunity. So if you're preparing and you know where opportunities exist, you can create your own luck a little bit. And you can increase your odds of winning by working hard, always trying to be in places where opportunity knocks. For example, for the hockey guys, right? I could not skate to save my life. And, I love playing hockey for the social reasons. In Arlington, everybody plays hockey, like you got to. But I scored goals. Like, I scored a lot of goals. And the reason I did that was because a coach of mine said, good things happen when you put the puck on net. And it's like, okay, so if I'm prepared to shoot and I'm aggressively seeking opportunities to simply put the puck on net, from a competitive perspective, I'm creating luck. And that, when you miss the net or you miss the goalie, the goalie saves it, as a scorer, you need to think about the next shot going in. So it's also having a quick memory and forgetting things that don't matter. But manifest luck. And if it doesn't happen, just keep that stick on the ice and put them on net,
If you didn't believe it already, there's proof that our East Coast boys spent some time on the West Coast with the use of manifest. I love it. That's awesome. So, dude, you probably remember this from Turbo, but I'm big on, like, just because you're not a professional athlete doesn't mean you're not a professional. And I really, every time I've led teams, and I do it now with our kids, it's like, hey, you got to approach this like a profession. And I think the highest praise you can give someone is calling them a pro. This is a sales pro. So just tell us, what does being a pro in sales mean to you?
Well, being a pro, I think first you got to kind of try to observe what you think a pro looks like and start to kind of define that, right? You obviously know what a professional athlete looks like, but you might not know what a professional seller looks like, specifically early in your career. So create some heroes, point to some guys or gals that you see, and try to mimic their behavior, even if that's from afar. So first you got to define it, I think, for yourself, because obviously it's kind of amorphous in general, like what's a pro seller. But then it comes down to actual like tactics, right? Like what 10,000 hours to mastery, I think, is like a really, really good idea. Like you got to do something for a very, very long time before you're going to master it. But the real lesson in that is like deliberate work over busy work, like staying focused on the things that you need to work on or that are working. You don't need to be a huge hardo, but like, have that work hard, play hard mentality. Just make sure you're doing the work that is focused. So work smart and hard, not work smart, not hard. Work smart and hard, I would say. We already kind of touched on personal accountability. So again, extreme ownership. Like I think that you even see this in professional sports. Like the folks that I admire in professional sports are usually the people who take ownership of losses or take ownership of bad plays, or coaches that protect their teammate, their players when they made a mistake, right? So I'm looking for that personal accountability in the people that I surround myself around, because in my opinion, that is a professional trait to identify opportunities for growth, both in yourself and others. And then lastly, which kind of ties into the accountability piece, is actually humility. So certainly always be closing, and don't lose your confidence at all, but always be closing, but really always be learning. If you aren't constantly stealing, if you're not practicing, you're not putting your own spin on things, you're going to grow complacent, because of pride. And I think a lot of people experience that the last 2 years in the marketplace, where, COVID was inflating performances in a lot of ways. And, people got a little too comfortable. And, I think you're seeing that experience on the other end when folks are getting laid off and wondering why. It's probably because you were a little too proud. So anyway, pride is the source of all sin. So keep that in mind. Humility is the source of all improvement. So if you want to remain a high performer, you must constantly improve. Therefore, you must be humble as well.
I'm gonna cut this clip up, and I'm gonna tag every single LinkedIn influencer who's been a BDR for 18 months that gives advice out, because I couldn't agree more, Mike. That was awesome. Got me fired up, buddy. Dude, unbelievable combo, Mike. Thank you so much for your time, pal. We really appreciate it. We got another required listening episode for our candidates. So thank you so much, dude.
Same here, man. It's an honor. And if there's anybody out there listening that wants to take the conversation any further, like hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat with anybody in this network.
Love it. This wraps up this episode of Merchants of Change. If you enjoyed this episode, the most meaningful way to say thanks is to submit a review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're interested in working with us, please come find us at www.shiftgroup.io.